Hi everyone, it's Allie's Travels. So a few months ago, I think it was in early December, I went to see the Logan City Cemetery. Went to, look around at all the beautiful gravestones, and the first one I went to, the first graves and statue I went to is the Weeping Woman. Since I was raised here in Cache Valley, I've heard a lot of stories about the Weeping Woman, the statue, and the basic story is if you go to her grave at night on a full moon, or of any of the anniversaries of her children's death, and you stand there and you say, "Weep, woman, weep," she will actually cry real tears. So yeah, I've done some research since then about the Weeping Woman, and it was quite an interesting story. So the Weeping Woman is built in honor of a woman named Julia Conquest, and her husband built a statue for her in her memory in 1917, I believe. Let's see, let me just find the information. Anyway, it's a really sad story because Julia married Olaf, and they lived in Logan in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and they lost quite a few of their children to the Scarlet Fever, which was common at the time, unfortunately. So I found this newspaper article on the internet that talks a little more about it in depth. Okay, this monument was erected by Olaf Conquest in honor of his wife, Julia Conquest, who died on January 8th, 1914, from valvular heart disease, most likely caused by scarlet fever. Olaf was one of the first county commissioners in Cache County and was also a well-known dairy farmer. Their first child, Margaret, was born in 1880, quickly followed by twins, Olaf and Oliver, in 1883. Orson was born in 1888, and everything seemed fine until the first bout of scarlet fever hit the family in March 1889. By March 22nd, 1889, the twins, Olaf and Oliver, were both dead, succumbing to the effects of scarlet fever. They were 5 years old. This was also when Julia contracted scarlet fever, which would cause her problems for the rest of her life and would ultimately lead to her death. Another child, Elam, was born in 1891, and things were starting to look up for the Conquest family. In 1894, Lillian was born, and it's unclear whether she was stillborn or only lived for a short period of time. In a matter of 5 years, the Conquest family had lost 3 of their 6 children. Julia and Olaf had another daughter in 1896 named Emilia, and in 1899, Inez was born. Happiness was again short-lived, and scarlet fever struck their family for the second time in late February 1901. On March 1st, 1901, their 2 daughters died from scarlet fever. Emilia was 4, and Emilia was 4, and Inez was 2. They were buried together in a specially built casket. In a matter of 12 years, 5 of their 8 children had died. According to family history, Julia was inconsolable and would often visit the graves of her children. Passerby would remark that they often saw Mrs. Conquest weeping at the graves. She progressively got weaker from the damage done by scarlet fever and passed away at 3 a.m. On January 14th, 1914. It's interesting because at the beginning of the article it said she died January 8th, I believe, 1914. Anyway, so yeah, she died sometime in January 1914. In her obituary, she was remembered as a splendid type of woman, tender, loving, patient, and true, bearing her great burden without complaint and always seeking the happiness and comfort of those about her. She was adored by the members of her family. Olaf had the impressive monument constructed and erected in the cemetery in 1917. So that was just a few years after she died. You can find the Weeping Woman in the Conquest family plot at the Logan City Cemetery, which is located at 1000 North, 1200 East, Logan, on the campus of Utah State University. So I thought that was a really interesting story, a really sad story. So yeah, Scarlet Fever was common at that time because that was before antibiotics were available. Antibiotics were available at the end of World War II, or around 1950, and before that, children and old people died of these kinds of diseases. All people died of all these kinds of diseases that are easily cured by antibiotics. So scarlet fever is caused by, if you've ever had strep throat, it's where you have a really, really bad sore throat and aches and pains, usually a fever. But yeah, you don't have a stuffy nose or anything like that. Just a really bad sore throat. And if it's not treated by antibiotics, which they didn't have back in those days, it will progress to scarlet fever, or there's a few other things it can progress to. I hear scarlet fever is very miserable. You develop a rash, and sometimes there's vomiting and diarrhea, a high fever. So yeah, just not a pleasant thing at all. So yeah, and I know that if I had I've never had children, but if I did, I think it would be devastating to lose them. And I can't imagine I'd be crying all the time too at their graves. So when I went to USU, I graduated from USU with my anthropology degree. And while I was there, I took a class called Introduction to Folklore. And in the class, we had to submit assignments about, local folklore that we'd heard. So I was researching about the Weeping Woman online, and I got this story from a USU student. I think it was submitted in 2018. So this is submitted by a man who had been attending Utah State for 3 years. So he says, I was having a rough week, and so I set out to find the Weeping Woman, a feat I had never accomplished before while it was dark outside, despite my 3 years of being on campus. I had watched a horror movie just before this excursion and sought to scare myself in an attempt to feel something other than pain. I ventured into the graveyard from the west entrance, right by the spectrum. I spent about 10 minutes, as I am a slow walker, walking to the location I had marked on a map on my cell phone and where the statue of the Weeping Woman was when I had visited during a previous trip during the day. I was astonished to find no statue where the map led. Sure, there was a mistake. I spent 30 minutes wandering around hoping to find it, to no avail. I began my journey out of the graveyard, intending to exit the same way I entered. Bummed that I was unsuccessful in my goal, I saw movement to my right-hand side and turned just in time to see one of my friends jumping at me from behind a tree. He apparently followed me into the graveyard, hoping to scare me. We walked together to the exit, but as we were about to exit, we saw movement and turned to see the weeping woman right at the exit. Bewildered and scared, we ran. I returned the next day, followed my phone coordinates, and the statue was in the location I had previously marked. The next day, I was told by a colleague that the weeping woman roams the graveyard and doesn't remain still at night. I couldn't tell whether my phone had malfunctioned temporarily or if I truly believed in the weeping angels, statues that are quantum locked. They don't move while being observed. From Doctor Who. November the 6th, 2018, I heard the same story, just changed a little from a colleague who I hadn't told the story to. So, yeah, just an interesting story, and as I researched more about this, I saw that there was people who have claimed to see Julia's ghost weeping at the graves of her children, or that, yeah, the statue will move around the cemetery, that kind of thing. So yeah, as the weather gets warmer, I plan on going to all the cemeteries that are around where I live, and I will do my research before I go, so I can tell you about some of the, like who was the first person to be buried there, and you know what they died of, and things like that. So hopefully that will be interesting to you, and don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel, and if you have heard any stories about the weeping woman, please leave them in the comments below. So thanks for watching, everyone. Have a great day. Bye.